The phrase "a tale of our time" for me evokes a story that becomes part of a canon or a lasting possession because it provides insights into the human condition. So no matter the age, it's relevant to our lives. So a tale for our time is essentially timeless.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Tales of Our Times. This is a show where we discuss the stories that move us, what makes them so meaningful, and why others could or should find meaning in them as well. This is not a spoiler-free show, so bear that in mind as you continue to listen. We tackle books, movies, podcasts, and more. Where there's a story, there's a reason to read. I'm your host, Amanda Stevens, and joining me today is my guest, Tyrel Cameron Eskelson. Welcome to the show, Tyrel.
Thanks for having me.
Is there anything that you would like to say to introduce yourself to get us started?
Sure. My name's Tyrel Cameron Eskelson. I'm 39 years old. I grew up on the prairies of central Canada in a little place called Rosetown, Saskatchewan.
Rosetown. That sounds so lovely.
Rosetown, yeah.
What? Okay, sorry.
Yeah.
Continue. It took me by
right.
surprise. It's such a charming hometown.
Yeah, it's a very nice town.
Mm-hmm.
I now currently work at Hokkaido University in Sapporo in northern Japan. I've written 2 books. The first is called The Island of Muramura, A Journey into Madagascar. And I'll soon publish my second book, which is called Taiwan 22, History, Travel, and Talking to Locals.
And thank you so much for being willing to join us over the phone. Of course, it's always interesting to talk to people who are in, different countries with similar experiences. May I ask, before we get into the story you've brought today, what interested you to write a travel book about Taiwan since you're living in Japan?
Well, I've been noticing Taiwan in the news a lot more over the last few years, and I came to realize how important it was in global issues and large power politics, but also realized that I didn't know a lot about Taiwan. So I wanted to go on this journey of discovery and learn as much as I could about it, and also actually go to the country and talk to the people there and ask them the questions that I had about it, and then write it into a story in a way that could help people who were in a similar position that I previously was in.
Yeah. Wow, that's really interesting. But anyway,
interesting.
What story have you brought for us to talk about today? Because we're actually talking about a movie.
Sure. Today I'm going to talk about the movie It's a Wonderful Life. Mm-hmm. It came out in 1946, and it's a drama, but it has elements of humor and sentimentality and even some of the supernatural.
Mm-hmm. Now, I'm interested to hear about this because somehow I haven't seen this movie yet, which is sort of a running theme on this show. I'm not very good at watching movies, but it has kind of become a holiday classic where, the premise is sort of an opposite Mr. Scrooge. Instead of the ghosts of Christmas past, present, or whatever coming to say, listen, everyone's going to be happier when you're gone. It's the opposite. You should be here. Everyone is happier because you're here.
Yeah, but there's an interesting connection between the two.
Really?
There was a man who wrote a short story in the 1930s. His name was Philip Van Doren Stern. Mm-hmm. The story was called The Greatest Gift. He tried to get it published and he wasn't able to, so he turned it into a Christmas card. It eventually made its way to Hollywood and to Frank Capra, and then they turned that into the movie It's a Wonderful Life. So there is a Scrooge-like character in It's a Wonderful Life, but in the case of the Dickens novel, Scrooge is the main character that the story and plot's about, and in It's a Wonderful Life, the Scrooge-like character is the antagonist of the story.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, I would kind of argue that Scrooge is sort of the antagonist of his story as well, but I guess that's the point of it. To the point, though, since I haven't seen it, and there may be people, especially, I think, in East Asia, who have never seen It's a Wonderful Life, would you mind giving us a summary?
Sure. So we go back to a snowy Christmas Eve in small town upstate New York,
Mm-hmm.
and we see this sign that says you're now in Bedford Falls. We overhear the prayers of many people in the town who are concerned about a good man who's in trouble. The protagonist of the story, George Bailey.
Mm.
And we go to where the heavens are watching, and they decide that they need to help George Bailey. So they choose this amateur angel named Clarence, who, despite 200 years on the job, he's yet to earn his wings. Clarence is told that before you can help George Bailey, you got to learn a little bit about his background and how he came to this point of wanting to take his own life on Christmas Eve. So we see some of George's childhood in the year 1919, where he saves his brother's life, and in the process, he loses his hearing in one of his ears. But overall, we get this picture of a well-liked kid who has a fascination with seeing the world. We next jump ahead to 1928, and it's the day of George Bailey's younger brother's high school graduation.
Is that the brother he saved?
Yes, that's right.
Okay.
His younger brother, Harry.
Got it.
For the past 4 years, George has been working for his father at his company called the Bailey Building and Loan, which is an institution that helps poor people in the community.
Oh.
But it doesn't earn a lot of extra or excess income for the family. But the institution has to rely on credit from a bank run by the Scrooge-like character who's named Henry F. Potter.
Oh, well, this is interesting. So the main character is sort of like the beleaguered businessman, and as opposed to like Scrooge.
Yeah, that's right. Yes, George is excited because now he thinks Harry's going to take his place working alongside his father, and this will free George to spend the summer traveling the world. And then he's going to go to college and study to become a big city engineer.
So he hasn't gone to college. He like just graduated and went straight to work for his dad's company.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and he saved his money for those 4 years. So, so he's at dinner with his father that evening, and he says to him, I couldn't face being cooped up for the rest of my life, and I want to do something big. Just as he was about to take off for this world travel, his father has a stroke and passes away. So he has to cancel his trip to Europe, and he spends the summer trying to settle affairs.
God, that's so sad.
Yeah. He sort of has this expectation that they'll appoint some new president or something to run it. But he overhears the board, and George becomes upset when they make some critical comments of his deceased father. So there's this important moment that happens between him and Potter, where Potter is the wealthiest person in Bedford Falls, but George gets in his face and says, my father died a richer man than you'll ever be. To me, it's an important line that shows deep down what George truly believes, even if he doesn't think that he has the same destiny or life path that his father took. But this is what he believed about his father. So the board of directors, they end up deciding that we're going to dissolve this business unless George takes over. So he decides to give his savings to his younger brother. His brother goes to college, and he stays and continues working there and running it.
That's crushing. God, that sucks.
So he keeps planning to go out and seeing the world year after year, and it's perhaps a little bit contrived, these situations that keep happening to him. Even on his honeymoon with his wife Mary, they're just about to leave town, and because it's the 1930s, there's a run on the bank. So he takes all his savings that they were planning to spend on this vacation and honeymoon, and he uses it to keep his bank solvent. And as World War II comes along,
Yeah.
because of the hearing loss in his ear, when it comes to seeing the world, and he couldn't even join the army to do it.
Yeah.
So,
Like ultimately a blessing, but for him at this point in his life, it definitely doesn't feel that way.
yeah, that's right. Yeah. So it's 1945 and it's on Christmas Eve, and all these years of having his dreams disappointed,
Yeah.
they come to a head with some thing that goes wrong. His uncle misplaces $8,000 that he was supposed to deposit at the bank.
So, oh wait, so
So,
his uncle went to Potter, the evil Scrooge guy, for a loan, not his.
well, his uncle took the money to Potter's bank to deposit it, and
Hmm.
they got into some kind of argument, and the uncle walked out forgetting that he had the money folded in a newspaper. And when Potter discovers this, he
Oh,
realizes this is my chance to take
okay.
them down.
All right, I see.
It's,
It's his evil plan.
so,
So,
yeah,
okay.
yeah. So George, they spend the day looking all over and can't find it, and he feels at a breaking point, and
Hmm.
so he drinks in a bar that evening, and later he's walking, and due to his despair, thinks about jumping into the freezing water. And this is when Clarence the angel comes down and grants George his wish that he had never been born. But he grants it in such a way that George can walk around town and see what it would have been like in that year, 1945,
Uh-huh.
had he never existed.
Hmm.
So he discovers his brother died as a young boy.
Oh yeah.
His wife, Mary, became a lonely librarian, and the whole town of Bedford Falls is called Pottersville. So,
Oh, okay. Yeah.
and it's now a town of mini bars and burlesque clubs and police sirens and pawn shops and things. So
That's fun.
it does.
It's like it's comically gone down the drain.
Yeah. Well, some people have argued that Pottersville sounds more interesting than
For
Bedford
sure.
Falls did.
Definitely not to a 1946 crowd, but like it certainly
Right.
sounds a lot like a more modern city, I suppose.
Yeah. Yeah. So Clarence sends him back to his life, and George rushes home to his family, and he
Hmm.
finds that the town has heard what's happened, that he was in trouble and he needed money. So because he and his father had been helping so many people for 20 or 30 years, the
Hmm.
town sort of rushed over and brought money with them, and said that we're here to support you. So
Hmm.
at the end, there's this resolution. There's success for Clarence, the angel, who earns his wings for helping George out of this jam. And at the end, there's perhaps this most memorable scene of the movie. George's young daughter, upon hearing the chime of a bell, says, "Every time a bell rings, an angel gets his wings."
Oh,
And that's sort of how the movie ends.
well, you know what? I have heard that. I didn't know it was from this.
Yeah, that's where it's from. Yeah.
Oh, that's so cool. Well, this is a fun story. I didn't realize it was going to take so many turns. I'm glad I mentioned the Scrooge thing up front because that just occurred to me and it seemed to be a lot more relevant than I ever realized.
Yeah, the actor who played Potter is Drew Barrymore's, I think, great uncle. His name was Lionel Barrymore, and
Hmm.
he got the part because he did some radio drama where he played Scrooge
Ooh,
and did a good job of it. So they thought he would be good for this role.
that's fun. I love the era of radio dramas. I guess I should write them on radio, but that was before that even. So, well, okay.
Yeah.
So from here then, let's go to what makes this movie so meaningful to you.
It's a movie that I find has lots of charm and funny moments, and I think others can care about this movie because the central message is that every human life matters. And
Hmm.
it's also good to remind ourselves sometimes that our own lives matter.
Hmm. Because I remember you said, like, when you were going through the summary, you mentioned that, like, one of the most meaningful lines you think is this line that he says after he hears people disparaging his father. I've already forgotten the main character's name. What is it?
George Bailey.
George Bailey, thank you. I'm so rotten with names. But George Bailey, like, spits out that, like, hey, he was a wonderful man and you shouldn't talk that way about him. And I think,
Right.
would you say that sort of summarizes what you just said? Because even though he disagreed with his father on many things, ultimately, just because he disagreed with him didn't mean that what he was doing wasn't important or impactful to the people around him, and actually the opposite.
Yeah, that's it exactly. I think It's a Wonderful Life has lessons for accepting how life turns out when weighed against the dreams and expectations that we hold. We there are lots of aspects to in this movie, but I tried to narrow down and focus on this idea that George Bailey had big dreams about seeing the world and living in a large city, building bridges and skyscrapers. And for many years, he held on to these big expectations for his life. And it's what he attached meaning to, what he felt he needed to do to start living a genuine or authentic life. Yet there's this innate sense in George that his father was living a meaningful life because he meant something to the people of Bedford Falls and lived for more than just himself. So
yeah, that's sort of the Christmasness of it, but not innately, right? That selflessness of spirit. But
right. Yeah.
To the last question then, is that why you think that this is a tale of our time? Or to say this in another way, is that the meaning that you think other people could find in it as well, or perhaps should find in it?
I think it deserves recognition as a tale of our time because it asks us to examine our own life and to feel gratitude for the good things we have. And I think also asks us to assess the goals we make and to be ready to recalibrate those goals when new opportunities come or the reality of life gives us something unexpected. But I also like how the movie makes the viewer consider what is doing the right thing, because George Bailey consistently gives up his dreams to do what he considers to be the right thing. But is it the right thing to give up on your dreams? And so I think viewers may come to different conclusions on that question, but the fact that each of us sort of faces those choices and the trade-offs associated with them in our own way makes this tale of our time.
Yeah. I mean, like you said, it's definitely, I think, something that most people can empathize with in some way, right? Having a moment or a moment of choice where you had to choose what you thought was the right thing to do, or the perhaps, if not right, maybe the more like logical or safe thing to do, rather than like what you really wanted to do. So however you would want to read into it, whether it's like a religious, what's the word, morality, or a logical kind of like, how are you deciding your dreams? It definitely has that level of being able to connect with it, I guess is what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah.
Well, unfortunately, we are out of time. But before we go, I would like to ask you one more question. So if you could give It's a Wonderful Life a subtitle of your very own, what would that subtitle be?
The Richest Man in Town. I think there's this play on the double meaning of it. It's one of the themes throughout the movie that though the Scrooge-like character Potter is financially the richest man in town, there's also this other interpretation that George's father and he are the richest people in town. And at the end, Clarence leaves this book with George and he has an inscription in it. And the inscription is something like, remember, no man is a failure if he has friends. So being
sweet.
The richest man in town. So
Oh, that's sweet. Also on the inside, I'm kind of like, yeah, eat it, Scrooge. Like, it's not you. Well, Tyrel, thank you so much for coming on my show. I've really enjoyed this talk. I feel better for knowing what happens.
It's been my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Unfortunately, that's all the time that we have for today. So thank you so much again, Tyrel, for coming on the show. And to all of you listeners out there, thank you for listening. This has been Tales of Our Time on Radio Taiwan International. And I hope that you enjoyed learning more about It's a Wonderful Life, the richest man in town. A Tale of Our Time. We'll see you next time.